Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana, and we're here today with special guest, Dr. Jeanine Canty, who's here to share with us her new book, Returning the Self to Nature, Undoing Our Collective Narcissism and Healing Our Planet. So welcome to the show, Jeanine.
Oh, well, thank you, Marianne. It's such an honor to be here.
What a joy it is to have you here and to talk about your new book. What inspired you to write this?
My main field I'm a professor, and so I do a lot of teaching, and my main field is ecopsychology, which looks at the connection and disconnection, really, that humans of Western civilization, or really anyone living under a corporate, globalized worldview, have disconnected from nature, and how that's really affected our well-being, our mental health, and probably most importantly, the earth, and really the damage that we've been doing. And in a little kind of side trajectory of my life, I was in a relationship with a man, and it was short-lived. It was probably just a half year, but it was a really, I would say, unjarring, traumatic experience. And as I processed the experience after our breakup, I reached out to colleagues who were therapists and counselors, and I did a bunch of reading, and I realized that the patterns that this person was exhibiting really mirrored the patterns of narcissistic personality disorder. And so I became really fascinated with that. And I remember in my early days of learning about ecopsychology, there were a couple authors that linked the connection between narcissism and our consumerism in our society. And it just really clicked of looking at narcissism, and not about the individual person. So many of our mental illnesses in our society are seen as personal issues rather than an actual statement about our general community, our general societies. And I definitely believe in the latter, and looking at how the individual traits of narcissism are really mirroring what's going on in our collective society. So I started really looking at collective narcissism and the damage that we're doing both to ourselves and to the planet under those lenses.
Well, I found your book to be such a profound read, and it really had me thinking about narcissism in a new way. How could we look at narcissism now? Because I know a lot of times it's a word that gets maybe thrown around, but maybe a lot of people don't know what that means.
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, narcissism is kind of thrown around almost everywhere these days, and it's hard to kind of escape the term. And it's really big in pop psychology, but just in the general kind of field out there. And so what we often don't realize is that everyone, and there's a researcher, I believe his name is Craig Malkin, who talks about a narcissistic scale or spectrum. And so we're all narcissists. We all have some degree of narcissism, and that's actually really healthy. But we want to be more in the middle ranges. We don't want to have too little narcissism, and we don't want to have too much narcissism. And so people with narcissistic personality have extreme levels of narcissism. And it's kind of a maddening illness or state. And it's really an individual who has had so much trauma that they need to create a false sense of reality to feel safe. And so they basically reorder their worldview and personality and actions to make everything about them. And so most of us have maybe a family member or a friend or someone in our life that we would say, they're probably narcissists. And it's important to note, I'm not a licensed therapist or a psychologist. And it's really even hard for someone who is a therapist to diagnose a narcissist. They often don't come in for treatment, and it's just really, even if they do, it's hard to diagnose. But the general traits of an individual narcissist is they have a very grandiose sense of self. It comes across as arrogance, that I'm so wonderful, I'm so marvelous, I have all of these wonderful attributes, I'm better than everyone else. And then another trait is having very little empathy for others. So they have a really hard time being able to have compassion and understanding for the people in their lives. And I'll get into the root of what causes narcissism in an individual after I get into the traits. But I was about to say before that all of us have someone in our life that we could probably say is a narcissist, and they're usually the person that you maybe meet for coffee or have a conversation on the phone, and you have to say something about your life and how you're doing first, because as soon as you say something, they're immediately going to turn it into them and not even necessarily ask you how you're doing. They're the people that really just need all of the attention. Another trait is shamelessness. It's this kind of feeling that they can do no wrong. If there's any sort of conflict, issue, it's all about the other person or persons. They have a really hard time taking accountability for their actions or really thinking that they ever do anything wrong. And then one of the biggest characteristics is having a fragile ego. So this deep-rooted sense of insecurity. And it's kind of ironic because a narcissist comes off as so arrogant and boastful, but it's really covering up this really deep sense of insecurity that's really, I would say, tragic. And then another trait is a hypersensitivity to critique. A narcissist doesn't want to get feedback on anything that makes them appear less than perfect. And so again, with the shamelessness, they don't want to hear about what they've done wrong or how they might hurt other people, because they really just can't take that in, because they've created such a protective shell around their identity and worldview that they can't tolerate anything that cracks that. So often if there's some sort of conflict with a narcissist and they receive negative feedback, they'll shun that feedback, and often they'll actually shun the person that gives them the feedback, and sometimes even to the extent where they cut that person out of their life. And then the last major trait is really central to narcissism, and it's this overall constant need to feel more special than others. And so it's the sense of entitlement, the sense that every day is your birthday, and that everyone should be giving you the attention, and really believing that it's not an act that one really needs to keep up at that state. And it's one thing that really hit for me when I was I did a really long period of studying narcissism after I had this experience in the relationship, but actually prior to that, because I was completing a meditation certification. And it was a year-long training, and towards the end, we had to choose emotional extreme state that we might have to work with potential meditation clients. And so I chose narcissism. And so I really thought about it so much. And one of the things that's not necessarily talked about in kind of the pop literature, if you Google narcissism, often you get a string of kind of extraordinary stories about these horrible narcissists that ruin people's lives and were really scary. And a narcissist can be incredibly dangerous. But there's also not so much material about having compassion towards this state. And when I did research on it, I realized that it's one of a number of personality disorders, but it's the only one of the, it's within cluster B disorders that's not necessarily hereditary. It's something that's conditioned, and it comes about through having really disruptive relationships with one's primary caregivers. And so there's two faulty patterns that can happen. And one is when the primary caregiver, usually the parent, gives excessive attention to the child, that in a way that all of the attention is really about the parent's desires rather than creating a safe space and encouragement for the child. So, you have the hyper achiever parent that wants their toddler to start applying to Harvard, or having, so much heavy demands that they're not really focused on the emotional safety and nourishment of the child. And same thing with the other faulty pattern is attention withdrawn too early. And that's more of the primary caregiver that just doesn't have the capacity or energy or skillful means to really nurture their child and give them appropriate attention. And both of those lead to the child having a really deep sense of damaged trust in both their primary caregivers, but really translating it to the whole world. And what happens there is they create this false self. And so they have to basically create a cocoon around them that feels really safe, their safe bubble, where all of their needs are met through this false reality that they create. And there's so many dynamics there, but it's really sad that little children are not getting appropriate caregiving, and then having these ruptured senses of their selves that create really negative patterns for their entire life. And I also, in my experience, I also saw how tragic it was that narcissists can be really dangerous and disruptive. And there's all sorts of different categories within narcissism, of different types of narcissists. And most of them, all of them are pretty detrimental to the people around them. But what happens is that these people, narcissists tend to latch on to individuals to feel their need to fuel their fire of being special. And so they'll basically focus on their targets or their victims, and kind of suck the energy out of them for a long time, and just give them so much attention and fuel that need for attention. And then suddenly there'll be some sort of disruption, painful incident, a series of painful incidents. And most therapists say that if you're in a relationship with a narcissist, you should run. You should basically get out of that situation and have no contact. If it's possible, a lot of folks, if it's a family member or a spouse, sometimes a coworker, it's really hard to get out of those relationships. But then what happens is that person just gets recycled into the general population, and finds new people to satisfy their needs. And then that cycle happens over and over again. And so that was one of my pieces of really needing to see this more as a larger issue rather than about the individual. And then, as I talked about before, my work isn't about addressing individual narcissism. I realize that all of this translates to the way that our society is acting towards one another and towards all sentient beings, towards the earth. So when we go back to those traits and look at what our current society, between things like social media and all of the advertisements and all of our hyper focus on individualism and all of the memes like pulling yourself by your bootstraps and you're number one and you got to look out for yourself, it creates this kind of story that we're all these individuals starring in our own documentaries, and everyone is so interested in us. And so we get pretty out there in our need for attention, constantly posting selfies or stories about ourselves, really hyper focusing on what our needs are and how we're so special. And so then we have a whole society of folks that are basically addicted to ourselves. We need to have the right jobs, the right partners, the highest grades, the best place to live, the right clothes, the right body types. And all of these things are kind of focused on externals of what the larger society is expecting of ourselves. And so if we go back to those traits, we have that first one, that grandiose sense of self, or this arrogance. We see that in our society. Folks are so focused on who we are as individuals and our specialness that we end up moving into that second pattern of having very low empathy for others. In the past, there was so much more attention given to really showing up in service for different people, for being almost more curious and interested in the welfare of others than ourselves, or at least having balance in it, of helping your neighbors, of actually, one of my things that it makes me tear up often thinking about it when we think about our country right now and how politically divided we are. In the past, it wasn't uncommon to have friends across different political spectrums and religions and even economic classes and in a lot of cases, different races. And now we're in this kind of bubble where we can reorder everything to just have people in our lives that reflect what our quote unquote values are, or what we think the right values are. So we have a very reduced ability to step inside other people's realities that are different, and to actually put aside a lot of our differences and actually just show up in caring for others. And same thing, often most of us don't want to hear about how maybe our worldviews or our actions or our behaviors in general might be hurting other people and, of course, the planet. And so there's all of those different traits. And so this just hyper need to feel really special. And of course, each of us are so very special, but we're all so very special. And it's also not just about humans. And when we're living in a society where we're just encouraged to focus on ourselves, we have so little time and foresight to step outside our realities and care about others, and especially to care about the planet. And earlier, I talked about that primary caregiver, those disruptive patterns that narcissists have, and how that results in damaged trust in basically all beings, and with our parents and with people in general. And if we translate that to collective narcissism, we've in our society have shifted our relationship to Earth, who is really our primary caregiver, because there's no relationship, there's no us possible without living on the planet, without breathing air, drinking water, having trees and grass and rivers and all these animals and stars, like just everything, the ecosystems that we live within. But we've really forgotten that, and we hyper focus on the human world, and not only the human world, but our human world. And so we've switched our allegiance to having Earth as our primary caregiver to what I would say is really now corporate globalization. So we're so oriented to what I've talked about before in terms of always needing to accrue money and other symbols of status, our looks, our relationships, but this unbridled kind of success, hyper competition, and this just constant need to feel special. And the result in both our levels of consumerism and our disdain for taking care of others and the earth has really resulted in both the ecological crisis. And so what we're seeing in our society as a result of this disconnection from nature and this collective narcissism is a heightened mental illness. We see so many people in depression and feeling a sense of disconnection from other people, feeling loneliness. We see so many people suffering from despair and addictions, whether it's addictions to technology and social media and television, games. We also see so many addictions to drugs and alcohol, addictions to consumerism, just constantly buying things, addictions to codependent relationships. There's just so much suffering in the world, and we're seeing this disconnection from one another and these constant feeling of alienation, just so many forms of mental illness. And so, yeah, it's just really tragic. And there's just so much there.
Well, I was so fascinated with not only your book, but the discussion we're having. And I love how you talk about collective narcissism. It's something that I don't believe a lot of people have really even considered before. And then to have that also coming to a place where it is damaging our planet, you really wove those two so well together. It makes so much sense.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. And I think, it's one of those topics we don't really talk about, because if we actually think about the purpose of corporate globalization is really for all of us to be consumers. So we constantly increase the profits of these corporations and as well as nations. And so keeping us really insecure about our needs and needing to buy lots of products, and also to be successful in these economic and other forms of individualism. We really don't have time to get into depth about what's going on, both in our own psyches and in our communities and with the planet. And so a lot of us have lost kind of the ability to ask a lot of deeper questions, or maybe if we do, we're finding them from kind of canned answers, whether it's from our, very kind of small worldview or political identity or whatever spiritual or religious community we belong to. But we're not having a lot of experiences that the kind of philosopher Krishnamurti would call them firsthand beings. And those are people that are having direct relationships to what is. And it can be what is in terms of the mindfulness of being in, being a body on the earth and having relationships with all of the beings in our immediate present. And it's also when we have such strong senses of ourselves and our ecosystems, and can actually get out of our heads, kind of our thinking minds, and more experiences, we end up being more, I guess, in a lot of ways, more of a unique and kind of not necessarily a rebel, but a really authentic being, because we have these really firsthand relationships that we're learning how to connect with something so much greater than ourselves and so much greater than just the human world. And so we learn kind of pathways to having deeper wisdom. And so much of it is just finding the very extraordinary in the ordinary, such as this morning I pulled open the curtains and there was a herd of deer outside, and we had a little interaction because the little deers jumped up and were a little afraid, and I waved, and then they came back to eat these little apples that are below the tree, and looking at the sunrise, having a really nice cup of tea, having a nice conversation with someone, looking at the moon, watching the leaves fall, the first snowfalls, which are coming. There's just so many, I would say, very ordinary experiences that take us into a more transpersonal and divine reality, but they're just such simple things. And often we forget to make so many moments of our day about finding the extraordinary and the ordinary, because those are the things that actually bring true joy. Not having a bigger wardrobe or a more expensive car or a bigger title. Not to say all those things are, the worst things to have in the world. I mean, but to really value really what's the real good stuff in life. And I think breaking out of this collective narcissism and shifting into some healthier relationships. There's a lot of folks that talk about when people spend time in nature, that civilization itself is only 3 days deep. So if we start really working on the patterns of seeing what's going on and breaking that and starting to form new relationships with ourselves, with other people, and I'd say most importantly with the natural world, we start to recover a lot of the lost gifts that we've had, that are innately part of ourselves. And in ecopsychology, there's a term called arrested development, which is basically saying that most adults in our society are, we've never really matured, that we're really stuck in like early teenage years because we didn't have the right kind of nurturement of having really healthy relationships with other people and with nature, and learning inter and intrapersonal skills and these deep levels of compassion, and really just learning how to be awed by being having this gift of being a human in the world at this time. And we start to recover a lot of these gifts, the healing becomes possible. And in the book, I do talk a lot about, towards the end, about how we can heal. And I don't know if that would be a time to jump into this, or if there's anything else you want to talk about.
Well, before we get there, I do have some other questions.
Oh, good. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I
No,
could just go on and on.
no, I'm glad that you do. I'm glad you do, because I'm just I find this so fascinating, especially when we talk about the collective narcissism that is in many ways damaging our planet. And I would really like to kind of drive
Yeah.
that home. So what does that even look like?
Yeah, there's so much in there. When we're so focused on our individual needs, we're constantly basically consuming all of the resources of Earth in order to meet our false needs, this false self. And so we can go about as individuals of buying a lot of things, of not caring about our ecological footprint, like all of the trash we might create through our consumption, not necessarily caring about where our goods and services come from. We live in an age, and I think the pandemic in a lot of ways have heightened this, where we don't really have to have relationships with people in our community. We can just order from online service to get all of our, perceived needs met without even having to interact with anyone. So we're losing more of the ability for caring. And so when we're doing all of these kind of selfish behaviors, we're actually also encouraged by, as I was talking about, the system of corporate globalization, to be both consumers and also producers. And so many of us have no really skill set with being able to survive on the land, and having more primal skills of even being able to grow food, of being able to go on an excursion in nature without getting lost, without knowing where our water comes from. So many of the things were dependent upon larger systems. And so we see nations and corporations having so much, especially, I would say, these transnational corporations having so much weight in how our lifestyles are produced. And so we even see now how the dwindling power of a lot of nations, or even world governmental organizations have, because so much of what's going on in terms of even war and ecological degradation is being led by corporations, often in participation with local nations through their military and government. So we see across the globe all of these waters that have been dammed, so people don't necessarily have access to clean water in their communities. So not only may they not have clean drinking water, but they don't have water to even grow crops. And that's more in a lot of I would say nations outside the US, but then we have so many pockets within the US that fall under the category of environmental injustice or environmental justice, where we're seeing more and more communities not having access to clean water, having to have water shipped in. We're seeing so many massive disruptions of people having to flee their homes because of wildfires, because we're so out of balance with the ecosystem, that rain isn't coming in proportion and water isn't reaching areas where it once did. We're seeing this with air pollution. And I know where I live, outside of Boulder, Colorado, in the last number of years, the air pollution in the summer has gotten so bad. And Colorado has been so well known for having like beautiful, clean mountain air. And we're seeing this in so many different communities. Same thing. So many of us are feeling the push of, the crunch of inflation, and how it's so hard to even be able to afford a house or afford food or, medical services, because so much of this is in the hands of corporations that are really locking down the resources of Earth and making them into scarce commodities, and really making them into things that you have to pay really high dollars for. And a lot of these are just basic services that everyone should have access to clean, drinkable water. People shouldn't have to pay a premium for that. Everyone should have an access to a place to live that's free from harm and provide shelter. There's just so many ways. And then we're seeing across the planet the disappearance of different species of animals and fish and polluted waters. And the list is endless. And we see these major storms like the recent Hurricane Ian that hit Florida, where we're seeing massive wars that have a certain kind of story to them, but we don't necessarily know the underlying story of all of the natural resources that are being taken while this war is going on, where these wars are going on, kind of the real story behind it. And so, the constant need to make profit off of the natural resources of the earth, which is then so inherent in our individual needs to consume all of these resources. All of the things I talked about in terms of kind of our addictions and our hyper focus on individualism and the kind of goods associated with them are directly connected to resources of the earth.
So, what are some ways that we can start getting to this place of healing? How can we heal ourselves and how can we heal our planet?
Well, I definitely have write quite a bit about this towards the end of the book and woven throughout. And I think it's really important that there's no one. Everyone should do this and will reach healing. Everyone has a different path towards healing. So there's no prescription that's going to work the same way for everyone, which is, I think, really great too, because we don't want planet of homogenized people. So much of this is actually breaking away from just one way of being and breaking into smaller ways of being that actually connect to our local landscapes and our communities. And so becoming embedded once again within our community and with ourselves. And so I write about this more of some patterns that happen with healing. And some of them we've talked about a little bit, well, a lot. When the first one is just this idea of the unraveling of actually just acknowledging what's going on in the planet, in our human communities, within ourselves, and we don't have to study every book and article and documentary about these issues, but just getting some basic awareness of admitting like, hey, what's going on in our communities and on the planet? It's not okay and it's not working. And it doesn't matter what my political affiliation or my social location or my religion. I mean, all of those are important factors within our worldviews, but we need to kind of step outside of some of our differences and really just admit that kind of wherever we're landing right now, what's going on is pretty messed up and it's not working. And we're seeing our home, the planet being destroyed, and we're seeing our communities and individuals and collections of people being devastated. And so really that process of acknowledging both our individual and collective entrenchment within this narcissistic worldview is a major step towards healing. But it's not enough to just think about it and be in our heads and get literate about it. We actually have to go a lot deeper, because probably anyone who's listening to this might notice that from some of the things I've talked about, they feel a little prickly or triggered, or maybe a little depressed or angry, or a really healthy response is to feel sad about it. And so a lot of the work is attending to our emotions. And there's practitioner scholars such as Joanna Macy or Miriam Greenspan and Pema Chodron and others that really talk about and give practices of how we attend to our emotions. We can't just abstractly hold all of this in our heads. We need to figure out what's going on in our bodies and seeing how so much of the pain that we're experiencing isn't just a personal thing. And that's where I love so much about ecopsychology. It's saying that so much of traditional psychology is saying, well, it's about you and your relationship with your mom or your dad or your partner, and not recognizing that if like all of the clean water is disappearing and air is getting polluted and it's getting harder and harder to scrape by with a living, and we're seeing so much anger and strife, maybe this isn't a personal problem, and maybe this is a collective issue. And maybe that sparks anger and sadness within me, maybe even some curiosity in terms of how we might work through this together. And so really staying with our emotions and treating them as wise teachers rather than going with our conditioned response to minimize and often repress our emotions. And ironically, because I talk so much about the dangers of being narcissistic, but we actually need to genuinely love ourselves, and not the false selves that we've created on our social media platforms of who we want others to think we are, but who we actually are. To have some deep compassion for our quirks and our awesome skills and our tenderness and our joyfulness and even our anger, our relationships, all those things that make up us, and learning more about who we really are, what we love, and really having some holding capacity to say, I'm a pretty decent person, and there's places where I've got lots of work to do, but in general, at the basic core, I care about so many things and people and places, and I'm not going to go into these patterns of not caring, because I know my genuine nature is to care. Another area that I just truly am a practitioner and really believe in is the power of mindfulness. And I'm a meditator, and like hundreds of thousands of people, do lots of yoga, but also spend a lot of time outside and just really being able to step inside our bodies and the immediate moment, the nowness of now, and quiet our minds a bit, but in a way that lets thoughts and things surface so we can be like, oh, that's interesting that I keep getting fixated on this problem or this person, but like what's actually happening right here in my immediate environment? And what if I just dedicated a little bit of space to just be right here? Because often that can be a pleasant experience. And I know different people have different conditions and situations, but all of us can find some moments of mindfulness in whatever circumstances we are. And then developing this ecological self. In both ecopsychology and deep ecology, this term, the ecological self, is when we can extend beyond our immediate self and actually start forming a relationship and actually falling in love with some being in nature. Maybe it's those little baby deers I saw in the morning that are so cute and so timid, or maybe it's a tree near where you live that you like to spend time with, or to a park and there's a body of water, or certain birds, or just having these deep relationships. And first it can be a small relationship. I remember my aunt was living in a city, and she would always be talking about this squirrel that came by her balcony. And my godfather, I remember he had this hawk that would, when he was going on his walk, would always follow him around. And so we can just have these like little conversations. And then suddenly we realize that our destiny and their destiny is actually bound up and we're connected. And we might be falling in some sort of friendship or even love. And it's different than the way we're taught love should be. And then same with the ecological self. We also can develop our ecological self to start doing some really healthy practices that are intended to reduce our impact on the earth. So probably most of us recycle. Where I live, most households compost. I was listening to something the other day that was saying, we are already on the planet, have all of the clothing that we need. We don't really need to create more, have all these recycled products that we can do, and thrifting and all sorts of stuff. And looking at that through so many lenses, we can antique furniture rather than just always buying something that caused more trees to be cut down. We don't have to overnight become like the eco superhero, but all of these like little actions can create big change. Maybe trying to grow something in a garden, or even a potted plant during the summer outside, like some tomatoes, and really starting to learn how actually hard it is to grow food, and just so many little actions. And then one of the biggest, and we talked about it quite a bit, is really building compassion towards others. So this relates to, I'd say, all of these things that we're talking about, but getting mindful to the present when we're actually with other people, or even when we're not with other people, and getting curious about what's going on with them, and getting back into having really good interpersonal skills, and just asking someone how they're doing, walking by a stranger and smiling, just helping a neighbor.
Well, Jeanine, I just love your book, Returning the Self to Nature. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I'm on Twitter, and actually I'm more strongly on things like LinkedIn, but I'm a professor at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And so you can Google me and find more about me there. I'm not a huge social media person, but I definitely use my social media if I have a talk. And yeah, I do a number of public events as well. And then, you can come study with me through various formats as well at CIS.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, thank you. It's been such an honor and pleasure.
Well, thank you, Jeanine. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Returning the Self to Nature, Undoing Our Collective Narcissism and Healing Our Planet. We're going to pause here for a quick moment and we'll be right back after this message. I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.